your right hand. State your name.
Christopher James.
You swear or affirm under the penalty provided by law that the testimony you shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you spell your last name for the record, sir?
C-L-A-Y.
Thank you, sir. Please take your seat. I'll ask that you keep your voice nice and amplified so we can all hear you. Let the attorneys finish their question before you respond, and they will extend the same courtesy to you. Sergeant.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sergeant, can you state who you're currently employed by
I'm employed by New Jersey State Police.
and how long have you been employed there?
It's coming up on 15 years in August.
And your current rank?
Detective Sergeant,
And how long have you been a detective sergeant?
4 years.
Now, are you currently assigned to a specific unit within the state police?
I am.
And what is that?
I'm currently assigned to the State Police Ballistics Unit.
And how long have you been with the ballistics unit now?
It's going to come up on 11 years in August.
Now, Ken, for the jury, as detective sergeant with the state police, can you briefly describe some of your duties?
Sure. We have several as a firearms examiner within our unit. One of the major components of what we do is the microscopic comparisons of discharged bullets, cartridge cases, and other ammunition components to a particular firearm. We also test fire weapons to determine if they're functional or not. Serial number restoration, distance determination, evidence intake, lecture, and courtroom testimony.
Thank you. Now, in order to perform those duties, do you receive any specialized training?
Yeah.
And what type of training do you receive?
So when you get into the ballistics unit, it's about approximately a 2-year training program that every examiner goes through. And it works as kind of an apprenticeship style program. We work side by side with another qualified examiner who acts as your mentor in training. We follow the training guidelines set by the Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners, AFI. And AFI pretty much sets the guidelines for what we do as firearms examiners throughout the world. So we follow those guidelines. And then within that 2 years, it's training assignments, again, working side by side with another examiner, proficiency testing, moot courts. And approximately after those 2 years, then you start as an examiner, if you pass your training, to start signing off on your own reports.
And does your training continue?
It does.
And do you go through it annually?
We do. The training is always continuing. With my 11 years there, I think I'm close to 30 professional and technical workshops that I've been through. Everything from serial number restoration, machine gun conversion classing, barrel making. So the training continues, and then there's also conferences, workshops we go to annually. I think I'm close to about 17 conferences and workshops that I've been to. So the training's always continues for us as examiners.
Thank you. Let's just know a little bit about your educational background. Did you receive a bachelor's degree?
Yes, ma'am.
Where from?
Rutgers University,
When was that?
1999.
And in what field?
Criminal justice.
And after achieving your bachelor's degree, did you go on to obtain your master's?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was that from?
Seton Hall,
And in what field of study?
human resource development,
And when did you graduate with your master's?
2011.
Now, do you currently hold any certifications?
I have 2.
And what are they?
So I have 2 certifications through AFI in the field of firearm and tool mark identification. One is in firearms, and the other one is in tool mark identification.
And when did you become certified in those areas?
2016 and 2017.
What is required to become certified in those areas?
So for any examiner to get qualified through AFI, you have to be a member for 5 years, 4-year degree, and then you would go through a practical test where they actually give you items to identify, and then you also go through a written exam as well.
Now, you indicated that you've been in the ballistics unit since 2009, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. What percentage of your duties would you say are devoted to ballistics comparison?
As far as now microscopic comparisons, it might be around 40% of my time.
Okay. And approximately how many cases would you say that you've worked on while in your time in the ballistics unit overall?
Overall, hundreds. Last year, I think we completed somewhere around 300 cases alone.
Now, during your time there, have you been qualified as an expert witness?
Yes, ma'am.
And approximately how many occasions?
34 times.
Do you recall in what courts you've been qualified?
32 times in Superior and twice in Federal.
And in what field have you been qualified as an expert?
Firearms identification.
Your Honor, at this time I would offer the witness as an expert in the field of firearms identification.
Thank you, voir dire.
No, sir, no objection.
Very good, based on the witness's education, training, and experience, court will accept his testimony as an expert in the area of firearms identification and registration.
Thank you. Now can you explain what ballistics is to the jury?
So if you just take the technical term ballistics, it's just a study of a projectile in motion. There's three different types. You have interior, exterior, and terminal. Interior ballistics is pretty much what happens inside the gun when you fire a gun, what happens to the ammunition. Exterior is basically when that projectile leaves the muzzle of the barrel. And you have terminal ballistics, projectiles impact on a target. For myself, as a firearms examiner, I'm more concerned, and the majority of my time is spent doing interior ballistics. Basically what happens once you fire that gun and the markings, the ammunition inside that firearm.
Now, Sergeant, when you conduct your analysis, which talks briefly about the comparison, and compare two shell casings, or would you compare two shell casings to determine whether or not they had been fired from the same weapon?
You can.
And how do you do that?
We do a side-by-side microscopic comparison.
And what are you looking for? Some things that you're looking for when you make that comparison?
So anytime we do a microscopic comparison, it would be either between two bullets or two discharged cartridge cases or discharged shells. A cartridge case, shell, same thing. So what I'm looking at as a firearms examiner are the tool marks. I'm studying the tool marks that are on either the bullet or the fired cartridge cases that are being imparted from the particular firearm that the cartridge case where the bullet was cycled through.
And so firearms, do they leave certain characteristics or markings as you spoke of, whether it be on the bullet or the shell casing itself, or the projectiles?
They do.
And what type of characteristics do they have?
So in firearms identification, there's basically two types of characteristics that we look for. One of the characteristics will be class characteristics. The other characteristic would be individual characteristics. Class characteristics are just design features by the manufacturer of a firearm. So when a manufacturer makes a firearm, designs a firearm, there are certain features that are inside that firearm. One would be the shape of the firing pin. It could be circular, it could be rectangular. You have a breech face in a firearm that's finished. When they finish it, it could be, you have parallel marks, you have circular marks. The barrel of a firearm, there's a twist to the barrel. Go to the right or to the left. There's also a number of lands and grooves inside the barrel. These are all design features specific to the manufacturer. The best way you can explain it when you buy a car, there's certain features that you might want to a car. The color of a car, you can get heated seats, tinted windows, leather upholstery. These are design features from the manufacturer. Those are class characteristics. Then you have individual characteristics. Individual characteristics are incidental to manufacture. They're basically accidental features that appear in the firearm from the manufacturing process. So when you manufacture a firearm, there's machining and there's tooling that occurs. And when you machine a firearm, there's ripping, there's tearing, there's these random and distinct marks that get imparted to this firearm. These features are distinct to that firearm. Those are individual characteristics, accidental characteristics. Those are the characteristics that we look for as an examiner to identify a particular tool mark to a tool. And when I say tool, I mean a firearm. Going back to the car analogy, when we use the class characteristic for a car, think of individual characteristics on a car would be these accidental features on your car. So if a tree branch fell and hit the roof of your car and dented it, that would be an accidental feature. That's a feature on your car, which had nothing to do with manufacture. Same thing if a rock kicks up and cracks your windshield. These are individual accidental features on your car, which are unique and distinct to your car. So that's what we look for. Two of the features that we look for as firearms examiners, class characteristics and individual characteristics on a discharge cartridge case or a bullet to try and identify if this bullet came from a particular firearm or if this cartridge case came from a particular firearm.
Now, in speaking with bullets versus casings, do you ever use a piece of demonstrative evidence or something else to help a jury understand exactly what a bullet is comprised of?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to show you what the state will call,
I guess it's not should be like.
we'll just call it demonstrative evidence. Did you bring this with you today?
I did.
Okay. And have you used this before with regard to demonstrations or explanation during testimony?
I do.
Okay. And can you explain to the jury, you were speaking a moment about the bullet versus the casing. Can you explain exactly, using the demonstrative evidence, what each part is?
Yes, ma'am. So this is just a demonstrative, it's a cartridge. And this is what you would load inside a firearm. And what you would do is you would just take a cartridge very similar to this. You would load it inside your ammunition magazine. The ammunition magazine is loaded inside the firearm. Once this is inside that firearm, it's in the chamber now. What happens is, well, there's 4 parts to this, just to begin with. You have your cartridge case, you have your bullet, your projectile. In here would be gunpowder or propellant. And in the back of the cartridge would be your primer. What happens is once this is inside your firearm, inside the chamber of the firearm, the firing pin strikes that primer, that ignites, or that's the ignition area, that's actually detonating the cartridge. What happens is there's a small explosion. That gunpowder that's inside this cartridge case, it starts to burn, and it produces this extreme amount of pressure. It's that pressure that builds up, and eventually this cartridge case is made of brass. It expands out. That pressure pushes the bullet down the barrel of the firearm. Bullet's going one way, and this cartridge case, because it's brass, is expanding, and then it gets extracted and ejected outside of the firearm. So you have that separation. So this would be a bullet, this would be a cartridge case, or a discharge cartridge case, or a shell. But complete, before it gets fired, is what we call a cartridge.
Now, a moment ago, you spoke to looking at tool markings and things of that nature. Where, using that as a prop, where exactly would you look for tool markings when looking at an item?
So, if we're just talking about a cartridge case, the areas that we would look for would be the different parts of the cartridge. So it would be the head area here, which is this primer area. You could also look for extractor marks, ejector marks, firing pin marks as well. What happens when this cartridge case gets detonated inside a cartridge? The first thing it's going to do is going to expand because it's made of brass and the pressure pushes it out. Inside the chamber of the firearm, there's all these imperfections inside the wall of the chamber arm. So when this cartridge case expands and it gets extracted and ejected, all those imperfections inside the chamber are marking the body of the cartridge case. That's one area that we would look for identification. You're also going to look for on the tip of the firing pin inside that gun. There's imperfections, can be random imperfections on the tip of that firing pin from the manufacturing process. So when that firing pin hits the primer, every time it strikes that primer, it's marking that primer with that indentation. That's another area that we would look for an identification of a tool mark. You also have breech face marks on the back of this cartridge case. What happens is because that pressure is pushing back against this cartridge, it's pushing back against the breech face of the gun. So any imperfections in the breech face of that firearm is picking up those imperfections as well. You can also get aperture shearing from a discharge, another area that marks the cartridge case. So there's several different areas of tool marks that we would look for to try and identify a cartridge either being discharged in a particular firearm, or if you don't have the firearm, you would just compare these cartridge cases together to see if you're looking for those similar tool marks of all those cartridge cases.
Now, when you receive a case from a prosecutor's office or a municipality to review items, is it given a lab number?
It is.
And that lab number is associated with each of the cases?
That's correct.
Do you recall the lab number specifically in this case?
I'd have to just look at the report.
Sure. Would it help to reference your report?
It would be.
Okay, I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as S-126. Is that a copy of the report that you generated in this case?
It is.
And is there a lab number on it?
There is.
And what is the lab number?
That's our laboratory C17-03183.
Okay, and now that you're here for testimony today, do you know that that lab number to be associated with the homicide of Shaquille Williams?
Correct.
And basically when the case is submitted to you, you don't know very much about the case?
That's correct.
Now, as part of your examination in this case, were you also given a firearm?
Yes.
Okay. And in addition to the firearm, were you also given a number of shell casings or casings from evidence that were collected as evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall how many?
13.
I'm going to show you. What is S86 in evidence at this time? Let me just take a look at that. Now, again, is there a lab number associated with this matter?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that on the box
Yes.
itself? And why is that done?
That's so we can compare, every time evidence is submitted to our laboratory, it's going to get a unique identifiable laboratory number. Evidence that comes in, that number is scanned, and then it's on a sticker on every piece of evidence that comes to the lab.
You know what I'm about. Now, after reviewing that S86, is that the firearm that you received from the Burlington County Prosecutor's Office in this case?
Your Honor, the firearm is loaded, it's safe to handle. That is, ma'am.
Thank you. And just for the record, were you comparing the serial number in this case to what is noted in your report?
Yes, it'd be the serial number as well as the caliber, made, and the made too, of the firearm as well.
Now, after receiving the firearm, did you in fact test it in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And how do you test it?
So any firearm that comes into our laboratory, test fire the firearm, test its functionality. One, to see if it works, and the second reason, if it doesn't work, we'll try and identify why it won't work. And we'll identify the malfunction, try and correct the malfunction. So any firearm that does come in, it gets test fired and there'll be a report associated with it.
And when you test fired that firearm in this matter, did you determine it to be operable and capable of being discharged?
Yes.
And in doing so, were you able to recover shell casings from your test firing?
Yes.
And why did you recover those discharged casings from your test fired rounds?
So we say we retain the test fires from every firearm that we test fire in our lab. When you have microscopic comparisons or microscopic work that needs to be done, this gives us an opportunity to, we keep the test standards from the firearm, so we know that this bullet came from this firearm, these cartridge cases came from this particular firearm as well. We'll compare our knowns to our unknowns to try and determine if bullet or cartridge case was discharged in a particular firearm.
Now, in this case, were you asked to compare your knowns or your specific test fire casings to the ones that were recovered from the crime scene and put in evidence in this case?
Yeah, so in a case like this, we would take that firearm and we would compare the test standards from this firearm to the cartridge cases that were submitted in the case to the firearm.
And again, just briefly, where would you typically look for markings of comparison?
If you're talking about a cartridge case, your firing impression, breech face marks, extractor, ejector marks, potential change marks, and also find the after shooting marks.
And were they found in this case? Were some of those markings found in this case?
Unsubmitted cartridge cases,
Okay. And were you able to make any comparisons in this case?
yes.
And how in fact did you do so?
Well, to this particular firearm, we can compare, or I was able to compare, there was discharged cartridge cases that were a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber. Firearm is a 9mm caliber, two different caliber. The ammunition is one caliber, firearm is another caliber. You can't take a 40 Smith & Wesson and discharge it in this pistol. It's too big. The other cartridge cases, it's also a different caliber. You have 380 auto caliber cartridges. So it's different than a 9mm Ruger cartridge, different than this pistol, and it also marks differently as well. This particular firearm, this high point firearm, the breech face marks are extremely gross because of the manufacturing process, they're parallel, And you're not seeing those marks on any of the 380 cartridge cases as well.
So did you make conclusions in this case with regard to this gun versus the casings that were found at the scene?
I did.
And what was that?
That this firearm did not discharge on any of the 13 cartridge cases.
Now, after comparing the crime scene casings, after that comparison was done, do you in fact write a report in the matters that you handled?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you also then compare the casings that were found basically to each other in this case?
I did.
And again, how did you make that comparison or do that comparison?
I'll do a side-by-side microscopic comparison.
And can you determine if casings are then discharged from the same firearm or not?
Yes, potentially. So when I do a microscopic comparison, bullet or cartridge case, there's 3 different conclusions that you can come up with. You can either identify that these items, bullet, cartridge cases, they were discharged from the same firearm. At times you can make an exclusion. You can eliminate these 2 cartridge cases being discharged from the same firearm, or at times it can be inconclusive. And for an examiner, that just means I can't tell either way if these 2 cartridge cases were discharged in the same firearm.
And can that comparison be done even if you don't have a firearm?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, referring to, maybe you don't need to refer to your report, but did you, the casings that you compared in this case, do you recall if you compared casings marked as numbers 18 through 20 and then 23?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you make that comparison?
Side-by-side microscopic comparison.
Okay. And as a result of the comparisons that you had made, were you able to reach any conclusions with regard to 18 through 20 and 23?
Yes, ma'am.
And what were they?
Those 4 cartridge cases, they were discharged in the same firearm.
And what did you base those conclusions on?
The tool marks. We studied the tool marks that are on those 4 cartridge cases. Significant agreement, that's what we looked for. And I was able to identify those 4 cartridge cases as being discharged in the same firearm. As far as what firearm it was, I don't know. All I can tell you is those 4 were discharged in the same firearm.
Now, do you also take photographs as part of your analysis overall?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification as S-127 in this case. Do you recognize that?
I do, ma'am.
And is that one of the photographs that you took in this case?
It is.
And can you just, for the record, state what it is depicting?
It's just a photograph of 2 cartridge cases side by side. It's basically what I would look at through a comparison microscope. One side you have a cartridge case number 20. The other side is cartridge case number 19.
All right, this time we see that S-127 in evidence and published.
Mr. Riley?
Is that the photos of the
Yes, sir.
fire tent? I'm sorry, I think it is outstanding.
Mhm.
Judge, that's fine, I have no objection.
Thank
Stick it in
you.
the list.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. S-127 is now on the screen. And again, can you just explain to the jury what we're looking at?
This is, again, it's a photomicrograph of what an examiner would typically look at.
Mr. Sergeant, we'll stop you. There's a monitor there. Feel free, if you need to get up and demonstrate your finger pointing, feel free to do so.
Thank you. This photo here, cartridge case number 20, and then cartridge case number 19. And what you're looking at is this could be a really good example of a class characteristic. In the middle, that indentation, that is the firing pin. That's where that firing pin strikes that primer, and it marks that primer. There's an indentation. But you can see they're both circular in shape. It has the same, you can see the breech face marks. They're not really parallel, they're more granular. Same. It's the same caliber as well. For me as an examiner, if you had 2 cartridge cases and one was circular and one was, for example, a rectangular shape, the examination could stop right there and you could instantly tell that these 2 cartridge cases were discharged in 2 different firearms. But this just gives you a good example of a class characteristic. Same circular firing pin impression, smooth granular breech face marks, the same caliber as well.
And you went on to compare the rest of the cartridge cases in this case as well, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you, actually, I'm just going to show you all of them at the same time. So I'm going to show you which one marked as S128, S129, S130, and S131 in this case. Are these all photographs that you took with regard to this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are they accurate depictions of what you saw at the time when making your conclusions?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state's going to ask to move and publish S128, 129, 130, and 131.
Sure. No objection to it.
Thank you. Put on the screen is now evidence of S128. Can you explain to the jury what we're looking at here?
Yes, ma'am. Again, photomicrograph, this is cartridge case number 23. Again, cartridge case number 19. Now we start getting into more of the individual characteristics. What you're looking at here is more of these aperture shearing type marks. This is an example of when you have that firing pin, it's circular, so that hole that firing pin comes out of is circular as well. During that manufacturing process, when they manufacture that firing pin hole, there's microscopic imperfections that are in that firearm. What's happening is when that cartridge case gets pushed back against that breech face, against that hole, you're seeing this individual shape, and it's very unique to that firearm. This just gives you an idea of what I would look at as an examiner. Underneath the microscope, though, you see a lot more detail, and it's that detail that I'm looking for to see if these tool marks that are there were produced or made by the same tool. When I say made by the same tool, or fired in the same firearm. What you don't see here, again, you would see underneath the comparison microscope, there's depth, there's width, there's spatial relationship to those marks. And those are the marks, or the areas that I'm looking for to try and determine if these tool marks were made, again, by the same tool or made by the same firearm. And you'll see this is just one sample of those 4 cartridge cases, 23 versus 19, but the rest of the 2 are all showing the same individual characteristics.
Would you mind just joining me down here just to kind of point out the specific aperture shear marks that you were speaking about?
So again, it would be this highlighted, this box area here, and again, you're looking at this area here where this primer is getting pushed back against that firing pin hole of a fire, of a particular fire. What I'm looking for is, again, these areas in here where you are going to see that spatial relationship, you see width, you see depth, there's texture to it. But this just gives you an idea of what we look at as an examiner to try and determine if these marks were produced by the same tool or fired in the same fire.
Would you mind just remaining there? I'm going to show you what's non-evidence is S129. Which shows cartridge case 18 and 19. Can you speak to this photo and exactly what you were comparing or looking for?
Sure. So this is cartridge case number 19. And you see the line down here that just divides each of the cartridge cases. So what you're looking at here are chamber marks, and they would be on the side or the body of the cartridge case. What happens is when that cartridge is discharged in the chamber of that firearm, again, that chamber, when it's manufactured, it's tooled, it's machined, so there's ripping, there's tearing, there's individual imperfections inside that firearm. So when this cartridge case gets discharged, it's brass, it expands out, pushing up against those walls, and then it's extracted from and then discharged out of the firearm. So when it's getting pulled back, it's picking up those imperfections in the chamber in the form of scratch marks, strike marks we call them. And you can see is, again, the picture's not as clear, but you can see where you see these tool marks here and these tool marks here, and we compare them and we line them up, and you can see that type of agreement that we're looking for. Again, that would tell me that these 2 tool marks were produced inside the firearm from those imperfections inside the firearm, which are distinct to that firearm. Just another area of identification. So the first area was the firing pin, the shearing, the aperture, and then the second area, which is totally different from the firing pin hole, would be the chamber marks inside the firearms.
Thank you. You may proceed. Now, we just spoke about the 18, 19, 20, and 23, that you looked at them for comparison. But were there other specimens in addition to those?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall the specific numbers?
There were, I guess, 9 other ones, which was 14 through 17, 21, 22, and 24 through 26.
And in looking at those specimens, the ones that you just named, did you come to any conclusions based on your comparisons with that group?
I did.
And what were they?
Those groups of discharged cartridge cases, they were discharged in the same firearm.
Now, it's on the screen, what is in evidence status? That's 130. If you could just come down again and just speak to this comparison of 16 and 24.
So another group of cartridge cases. Cartridge case number 16, cartridge case number 24. And what you're seeing here in this area are called fire pin aperture shear marks. So when you have a gun, what's going to happen in a particular firearm that will leave these marks? When you discharge it, the barrel of the firearm is going to drop slightly. When it drops, you're going to get this shearing on the cartridge case. What happens is that primer, this is the primer area of the cartridge case, it's soft, so a portion of that softer metal will get sheared off when it's ejected from the fire pin aperture. But again, I'm comparing these two cases, I'm comparing this specific mark, and you can see how these striated marks, they start to line up, they form a pattern. And again, as an examiner, when you're looking at it underneath the comparison microscope, there's depth, there's width, there's ridges, there's spatial relationship. That's telling me as an examiner that these tool marks on these two cartridges were made by one tool, one for discharge in one firearm. If these were two different firearms, you wouldn't expect to see anywhere near this type of similarity.
So you also said 17 and 26 fell into that group, is that right?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to show you what's now on evidence is that's 131. Looking at cartridges 17 and 26, could you speak to their comparison?
These, the other comparison I just looked at, those are those individual characteristics that I would look for an identification. This is going back to a class characteristic. The class characteristic of these two cartridge cases, again, you have that circular firing pin depression there. You have very similar of the aperture shear marks here. It's the same caliber cartridge case as well, and the same type of breech case. Again, I was doing a comparison of two cartridge cases, and one had circular firing pin depression and one had rectangular firing pin depression. Right off the bat, you can make the determination that it's two different firearms. In this case, all the class characteristics are similar. Circular firing pin, same caliber, same type of granular breech face marks. Then you would take the next step and try and look for those individual characteristics to determine if the marks on here were made by the same tool or discharged in the same firearm.
So would you expect to see this pattern of similarity if it had in fact been two different firearms?
No, not the individual characteristics.
You can take something. Now, although we've only looked at 4 pictures of a grouping, or 4 or 5 pictures today, you in fact compared every casing to each other, is that right? In this case? And you indicated that 14 through 17, 21 and 22, and 24 and 26, you had made a conclusion on them, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And your conclusion, I believe you stated, was that they were fired from the same firearm?
That's correct. Those 9 cartridge cases, those were discharged in the same firearm.
Okay. And was that a different firearm from the other 4 that we had looked at earlier?
Correct, 2 separate firearms.
And those numbers were 18, 19, 20, and 23, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that your opinion in this case, or is that a fact?
That's my opinion based on my training.
No further questions, Your Honor?
Thank you. Mr. Riley?
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Melissa.
With regard to the last question you answered from the prosecutor about your opinion versus fact, the reality of it is there are only 2 weapons involved, right?
And this one, if you include the firearm, the high point, that would be 3.
Well, we're not gonna come with the high point, because that doesn't have any relevance to this case in terms of the casings.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Okay,
Correct.
so ignore that for a second. You've got 4 spent casings, was that the 9, was that the 380, or was that the 40 caliber?
3 each.
That's a 380. Then you got 9 that are 40 caliber.
Correct.
There are no others, right?
Correct, sir.
And you can conclude that the 4 380s were fired from the same weapon, right?
Correct.
And the 9 40 calibers were fired from the same weapon.
Correct.
Two guns.
Correct, sir.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
State.
Nothing, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant. Thank you for your time. You are excused.
Thank you.